Oh, hi. I guess I got caught with my hand in the cookie jar. Oops. I'm Colleen Minder, a professional chef, and I guess I'm just a cookie lover, but the cookie jar is empty. You know, I used to have a cookie jar like this at my grandma's house that I always used to come and take cookies from. But I guess I'll have to bake my own. It's not that hard. If you think about baking as sort of a chemical experiment, the only thing is, when you're done with this chemical experiment, you've got a great plate of cookies. Okay, now we're in the lab, and I want to talk about the chemicals we're going to use for our cookie experiment. There's flour. That's going to be our base, and there's sugar. Now, sugar adds flavor, of course, but it also adds browning ability. Then we have leavening agents, baking soda, baking powder, sometimes both. This is going to give the poof to some of those cookies we see. We're also going to add a fat, like butter or margarine or lard or oil. And this is going to give us that mouthfeel and tenderness that we love in cookies. Then eggs as a binder. Now those are the ingredients that all cookies have. But what makes one cookie different from another? That's the flavoring agent. It can be chocolate chips, vanilla, nuts, or spice. Now we're ready with our ingredients for our experiment in making cookies. Now, every experiment has to have a formula. And the formula for our experiment for cookies, I find in a recipe book. It's very important to read the entire recipe before you get started. So you know if you have enough time to complete the recipe, you know what the steps are, and most important, you know you have the ingredients on hand. Okay, so I've read my recipe, and I've got all my ingredients out, and now we're going to have to go to the next very important step in this experiment, measuring correctly. We don't want anything to blow up by accident. Okay, so here we have our flour, and I want to show you how to measure flour correctly. We want 1 cup of flour, and we're going to use a dry measure. Dry measures are usually metal or plastic. We're going to dip it, we're going to lift it, and we're going to level it. Now we know we have exactly 1 cup of flour. We're going to use a half a cup of sugar. Same thing, dry ingredient, dry measure, scoop and level. Now brown sugar measures a little differently. It measures in a dry measure, but it's called a solid measure. It's like you would measure lard or butter. You want to put the measure in, and I'm going to do this inside the bag because otherwise it's very messy. Put the measure in, and then we're going to press it into the measure and level it off. And when it comes out, it should look like that and be solid. That's why it's called a solid measure. Try that with the flour, and you're not going to have a very good outcome. Okay. Now, you never use very much extra liquid in a cookie recipe, but I thought at this point I should tell you a little bit about liquid measures. Liquid measures are usually glass or clear plastic, and they don't measure at the top. They measure at the line, and this is how you have to do it. You put it on a level surface, and then you have to bend down to make sure it's at the line. Now, it helps if you're short or more limber than I am, but we're going to put that aside. Now, here's kind of an unusual measure that you might not think about. Most recipes written in America call for a standard large egg. And that's this one right here. If it doesn't specify in the recipe, you always use a large egg. This is a medium egg. It's very subtle, but there is a size difference, and it could change the outcome of your recipe. So whenever you're not sure, always use a large egg. Now you measure butter or lard or any other kind of solid fat like a solid measure. But I've got a little trick. I like to use sticks of butter because the measurement is right on the stick. This is 1/2 cup, and I don't have to measure that. I know it. Okay. Last but not least, we have our teaspoons and tablespoons, and they're dry measures, and they measure again at the top and levels off. So, I think we're ready to start our baking. Now, we're going to take our butter and put it, and this, by the way, should be room temperature butter. See how soft it is? That's great, because that's going to give me a big head start. And to that, we're going to add our sugar and our eggs. But first, I want to make sure my butter is nice and soft. This, by the way, is called creaming. And then the sugars. And then I think I'm going to add that egg. I didn't know which egg was which for a minute, but I think I've got the large one. Oh, make sure the shell does not get in the bowl. Now the butter, the eggs, and the sugar beautifully creamed. Now we're going to add the dry ingredients. We're going to add our flour, our salt, our baking powder, and once again, mix it up. Okay, this is how our dough looks. And now we're going to add the flavoring agents, the vanilla, and where are they? Yes, the chocolate chips. Okay. Our cookie dough experiment is ready for the final stages. The first thing the recipe tells me to do is to preheat the oven to 375. That way, it'll be ready when I've got the pan ready to bake. Now I'm back here with my pans. My recipe says an ungreased cookie sheet, and that's what I'm going to use. It's important. Sometimes it calls for grease, sometimes ungreased. Mine says ungreased. Now it's nice if you have a really heavy metal cookie sheet, but if you have one that's a little bit lightweight, you'll get a better result if you take one cookie sheet and put it on top of another. That's as good as a heavy metal cookie sheet any day. Now, my recipe says that I should drop the cookies onto the baking sheet, measuring a couple of teaspoons and keeping them 2 inches apart. That's what I'm going to do. By the way, this is a great tool for making cookies even shaped. It's a cookie scoop, just like a miniature ice cream scoop, and you get an even cookie every time. Is that 2 inches apart? I think so. But if you don't have a cookie scoop, 2 spoons and a good eye will work just as well. You're being careful because if you have a big cookie, it'll take longer to cook than a smaller cookie. That's simple. And you want all of your cookies to cook evenly. Okay, we're going to take our pan and we're going to put it over to our preheated oven. By the way, one thing I didn't mention is before I even turned the oven on, I made sure that the racks were as close to the middle as the oven it goes, in a middle rack or as close to the middle, and then it's going to bake. While my cookies are baking for about 8 to 10 minutes, we have to talk a little bit about nutrition. Now, as you can tell from the amount of fat and sugar in our cookies, they're at the top of the pyramid, of the food pyramid. That means they're an occasional treat and we love them. But actually, we can make them more nutritious. If we wanted to use a whole wheat flour to add a little bit of extra fiber, or some oatmeal, or dried fruits like raisins, that would make our cookie a little more nutritious. Always good to know. Now the cookies we just baked are called drop cookies. They're called drop cookies because you make the batter and you drop them onto the pan. There's another kind of cookie called a bar cookie. You probably know the most famous bar cookie of all time. That is the brownie. The brownie is really a bar cookie. We're going to take our same chocolate chip batter and turn it into a bar cookie, and this is how we're going to do it. We're going to take a pan, this is a 9 by 9, and we're going to spray it this time. We want a little bit of oil so that it'll come out. And then, instead of dropping them, we're going to press the rest of our batter into the pan. Now, bar cookies. Why would you do it this way instead of the drop cookie? Well, as you can see, this is going to save a lot of time. All we have to do is just put one cookie dough into the pan, into it goes, into the oven, and we've saved ourselves a lot of time and energy. Well, my cookies are done. You see that they're almost the same size. How can you tell if they're done? When you push them and they stay dented. One of the big problems is overcooking them. Now we're going to put them onto a rack so they can cool.